Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we'd left off on verse 20. The deluded seek and gain finite fruits. So that's the topic from 20 to 25. So when one is deprived of wisdom, wisdom is something which we might, in everyday parlance, use quite loosely. Somebody is skilled or good at something, they know their what is it? They know their stuff, as it were. But when we're talking about wisdom here, it's talking about that person who has not only that knowledge of the self, has become that knowledge, transcended the knowledge side of it, actually become it, that actually acts out, actually sees a different perspective in life, which is not to do with the material of the utilitarian values, but to do with the spiritual, something beyond the material being. But because we don't see that, because we don't recognize that we're actually paripurna, full, what our original essential nature is, foolishly we pursue limited goals. We pursue the material things in the hope that they will gain us the same as that spiritual value is offering, that fulfillment, but it never does that. So that's the issue. It never does it. So hence why, excuse me, we have texts as the Bhagavad Gita, making us aware of what we're actually losing out on. So that knowledge, that wisdom is available. But you've got to know to tap into it, as it were. We'd started verse 20, yeah? Let's chant it anyway.
कामैस्तैर्तैहृतज्ञानः प्रपद्यन्तेन देवतातं तं नियमम् आस्ताय प्रकृत्या नियता स्वाया.
So this is 20 to 25, this topic is. So the person of wisdom makes an absolute beeline for the self, the Brahman. And those who lack that pursue other gods, limited goals. So there's a lack of an understanding that one is that self, paripurna. So the moment you don't comprehend that one is that self, paripurna, the lacuna is that we go out to fulfill is in the objects and beings of the world. We go out by using that means to fulfill those desires, pursuing that acquisition for our enjoyment. It never satiates. That's the problem. If it satiated us completely, there would be no issue. We can just carry on with what we're doing. But it doesn't do that. So the person who does that, whose focus is outward, is extroverted, occupied with the world. So that person, deprived of wisdom, approaches other gods. So what we're attempting to do is take our thoughts from the world and place them on the self. So take your thoughts from one place and place it on the self, which is tricky to say the least, because you can see everything tangible in the world, and this self isn't tangible in one sense. But there's something a little bird tells us, your conscience pricks, when you're heading in a direction which feels like it makes sense, there's a truth. So you've got to follow that. You've got to have that shraddha. But since they're understanding, the great sages understood that the mind can't stay in any particular place. You may pluck it one time and put it on something higher, but it will still, its desire, our vasanas are so strong that it will still go back into pursuing all sorts of acquisitions just for the enjoyment, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But since there was an understanding by the sages that this is what happens to us, that whole idea in Hinduism to plant gods wherever you went, whatever your pursuit, to remind you of something higher in one's limited ideals, limited goals. You're placing something there which is of bigger value. So if you were to pursue wealth, Goddess Lakshmi was placed there. So you have that at the back of the mind when you're pursuing it. If you're to pursue music, there will be a god for music, or knowledge, Saraswati, etc. So wherever your mind would go, there was a god planted. In fact, I remember when I was, this is a little bit of a crude example, but I remember when I was very little in India, as you go up the stairs of places, you see gods, tiles, somewhere in the corners of the staircases on each step or something like that, or at the corner. And this is very crude, but it's an interesting reminder. The reason these images of murti idols will be planted there in different places is so that those people who would eat betel nut and spit would not spit where there would be a god. So they wouldn't, whatever their not so nice habit was, they wouldn't do that, because there's a reminder of something higher, auspicious, so they feel, no, I can't do that. So within ourselves, when we allow our conscience to prick, whatever we're pursuing, when our conscience pricks, we pursue, we lift ourselves to something higher, beyond the limit. So you can't help what your nature is. You can't help what your vasanas are. They are what they are. So a way of channelizing that is to plant gods everywhere. So those which don't have the wisdom may start with that type of idea. So if you're seeking limited ideals of name, faith, fame, wealth, position, power, all that, which mostly everybody is doing, then you plant something higher. to at some point recognize a bigger value of the self within you, because the limited goals don't satiate. Let's read it. Jyoti, would you like to read? Okay. Nishi, would you like to read?
Those deprived of wisdom approach other gods through various desires, resorting to corresponding rites led by their own nature.
Let's continue.
Yes.
Yeah.
The fifth topic covers verses 20 to 25. It explains how the deluded, ignorant of the Supreme Brahman, seek and gain mundane fruits in the world. Lacking knowledge of self, their desires are confined to finite goals. They merely pursue and fulfill these limited desires.
So, any example of finite goals?
Material.
Mm-hmm. So what do we do?
Name.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. So practically speaking, so name, fame. We mentioned all of these. So what does it mean practically?
That the search for fulfillment never really ceases.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So what do? We get out, we go to work or whatever your vocation is, you pursue that, you want to be happy, so you want to have an X amount of wealth, X amount of maybe family around you, maybe some vacation occasionally, maybe to achieve the highest in your vocation, to be honored somehow. Maybe you do a bit of community work. So why I'm just putting this forward is to, when we say name, fame, power, position, etc., it's very easy to say in the words. So it's actually understanding, what do we do every day that is actually dictating our limited goals, and what do we do, what can we do to up it a little bit for ourselves? Anybody, you might have a desire, I'm going to become the champion of X. Going to be the Wimbledon champion. In actual fact, it's very interesting. I don't know if you remember, Novak Djokovic didn't go to, I think, was it the Australian Open? Was it the Australian Open? But when you listen to him talk, that was his choice. He didn't want to be vaccinated. Okay, that's not the argument here we're talking about. But when you talk to him, when you hear him in interview, he has a principle bigger than the game. So we're not talking about, it could be, we're not talking about, does he have the principle of self or Atman Brahman lingering? I don't know. We're not talking about, but he has something bigger than the game to push him forward in his play. So the game is really, really important. That's his vocation. But there's something above that he's pushing him forward. So he's not just name, fame. He's not attached on that. There's something bigger. It's just a small example. I don't know the ins and outs of this personality. It's just some observation. So in yourself, whatever you're pursuing, you think about what's your bigger cause, apart from what your vocation might be. The vocation, no doubt, will help you, and you need to use that. But what is the bigger picture? What is the backdrop that you're after? How are you moving it towards that truth? So limited goals or something bigger. But you have to think about it in practical terms of your everyday. Okay, what does this actually mean to me in what I do? Let's read the
self, Atma within, is paripurnam, whole, supreme, infinite. The deluded without self-knowledge is not aware of his infinite nature. Thus he feels a sense of incompleteness, an emptiness, a void within. With the hope of filling this imaginary void, his thoughts run towards the world of objects and beings. The stream of thoughts flowing from him to an object or being is known as desire. Several such desires issue from the void caused by the ignorance of self.
So that's what's happening. We don't know this truth, so because we've not understood what it is, there's a desire which needs to be fulfilled. There's a feeling of emptiness. So we rush out to get them fulfilled any which way. There's a pusher, there's a pressure. It's a pressure which needs to get back to its original state. So we're pressured constantly to get back to that state. So we're finding a way constantly to fulfill that lacuna, which is pressurizing us, stressing us. And we won't rest content till we get there. But it's actually saying we are full. So our whole quest is to recognize, how is it that we are full? If we are full, okay, how can I recognize that? It's understanding it's as mad as this. When you see, often you see on the TV or in the news or things, celebrities or people dressed in their gowns or what have you, and the glamour of something. So we get a commentary which is talking about what a person is wearing, and they wore this and that and the other. And then as we keep seeing that person on the news or wherever it is, we begin to believe that that person is in association with their clothing, rather than we have no clue of what that person is. We feel we know them from their clothing. But it's ridiculous, because the clothing doesn't make the person. So we feel when we go into the world to fulfill our desires, that it's in that. It must be in that. That's what it looks like, that truth, that peace, that happiness. But those are just the vestures pursuing something to fulfill themselves. It's not actually what it is. So we're kind of masking the actual identity. So it's trying to tell us, actually, we're the self. We're full, we're whole, we're completely satisfied. So because of the identification on something else, the physical, the material, the emotional, the intellectual, the focus there, we see that rather than what it is. So it's trying to get us to pluck our thought from one place to another, from the world to the self. Not get confused by when we keep getting thoughts fired at us, we think that that's what it is. So it's where are your thoughts? Let's read a little.
I think Ash had something.
Ash, sorry.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, I think it's understanding what being full is. that's not a question or a statement. I'm just trying to figure out, is that what causes us to go out looking for fulfillment, because we don't really fully comprehend what being full is, and therefore we're never satisfied.
Yes.
So how do we grasp that feeling or thought or the concept of what being full is?
So first of all, we're fueling ourselves with knowledge here to get some ideas. So this is the knowledge side of it, the thought process side of it. And it's to understand that the gross values, the material value, the physical value, you can see them more immediate, but they have a shorter lifespan of pleasure, happiness, content, enjoyment than perhaps an emotional value or perhaps an intellectual value. They have a little bit longer an emotional and then a little bit longer an intellectual value, meaning something which you draw from within and make a distinction upon, something which is more pervasive. So the more you delve within yourself, the more you begin to identify with those thoughts which are more pervasive. The more pervasive it is, the more it holds you. It's subtler. So it gives you a capacity to think beyond the box. When you're focused on the material or the physical, it gets limited there. You can't see the bigger picture. So it's a matter of refining yourself to understand what that full is. Because as you begin to see, the whole thing is giving descriptions constantly of what the self is, what this full is. But the thing is, when you are pursuing the grosser values, the physical body, the emotions, the intellect, those are limited in what they can offer. So when the thought's focused on the material, it doesn't last, so you don't get satisfied for very long. So you get stressed out. So you're not after that. So you've got to go within. So you can't be dependent upon outside. So you've got to investigate when you go within, take a knowledge from wherever you take it from, which is talking about something which is more universal, more pervasive. So in that, slowly you're placing your identification away from the transient things and putting it on the more permanent things until you can actually hold it on something universal. The backdrop is at the back of your mind in anything you pursue. Hence why there was God's placed everywhere. So, talking about the example I was mentioning, the person who has a bad habit of spitting that pan out in the street or in the building can't do it when they see a God, because they're thinking of something more higher. That thought comes, even if it's for a split second, they can't do it. So it disciplines them to not do something which is impulsive. It gives them something which is a little bit bigger for that moment in time. So we're constantly building ourselves in our decisions, in our emotions. Do we do that or do we do that? With the knowledge that we take in. So how do you know what full is? You've got to put in your efforts to raise yourself.
Thank you. I'm thinking, just come to mind from the examples you've given, like we are full and we don't know it until much later. And I'm just thinking back to like my childhood. At the time I had agitations and things, but now I look back, it was actually fulfilling. It was quite full compared to where my life is now. So I think maybe we are always full in the moment, but we don't perceive it until reflecting later on in life, possibly.
So the whole thing is saying we're full, but we don't get it. But
Yeah,
all the time. So it's actually trying to get you to think it. How is that so? So it's like whatever we identify with, that's where it's at. So if we identify with the vestures of somebody's garments, and we feel that that's their personality, obviously we know that's not their personality, but the total identification there makes us believe that's who they are in that garb. But talk to them to find out maybe if that's a reflection of what they are. So the same with ourselves. We put our identities in different places on our physical, our emotional, intellectual. But until we start looking at something bigger within ourselves, and also that same self is in the whole, everything else, until we start training our minds to think on that more universal picture, then we just keep identifying with the opposite of that. So it's a training to refining our thoughts of what's real, what's unreal, what's transient, what's more permanent. We're constantly making that distinction, which requires an intellect, and the process is to grow the intellect. So you can do that. So you become steadfast. So you can actually you'll be entertaining values which push you towards something permanent, but push you, you don't have the interest to get into the frivolities. So you've dropped it, no longer interested in certain frivolous things of life. You're interested in something more universal. The realities it don't satiate you. In fact, they don't give you anything after a while. So why keep held onto them? Does that make sense? Tim?
A few minutes ago, you mentioned the example of a tennis player, Djokovic, who didn't need to compete for an Australian title. And that you're suggesting, although we know nothing about him, suggests that he is paripurnam, he's full.
No.
He didn't need to pursue it. Is that what he was saying?
No, I'm not suggesting he's full. I'm just suggesting one would perceive him and think the most important thing is to play tennis to him. But it was telling that he would, in an interview that I'd seen, he would do it all again, because the most important thing was to keep himself sacred. And the game was just one thing that he did to pursue his life, but it wasn't the be-all and end-all. So he wasn't dependent on the game, because he had something bigger in mind, yet that's his vocation, so he has to play it out. So he's playing it out with the backdrop of what's important to him. So you play your life out, but at the backdrop, you're playing your life out with a value of evolving yourself. That's more important than what's going on in the actual activities. But everybody focuses on the activities, the game of tennis, not the person value set. So all I'm saying, I'm not suggesting his paripurnam at all. I'm suggesting that his value set wasn't dependent on playing the game, though that will be a part of it, but he was not dependent, it's independent from that, which is what allows him probably to play the best game. If that makes sense. So he's got some other value which is holding him fuller than the game, but he plays the game because that's his vocation.
But he's more closer to paripurnam than someone who's just playing tennis to win.
So he's got perhaps a bigger, perhaps I don't know him, but he's got something which he holds of bigger value within himself than the game. The game is just the expression. So the game is definitely important. But it's not the only thing. There's something bigger backing that game. Something bigger, bigger value. I don't want to say because I don't know him. But it's blatantly, obviously, he spelt it out. There's something more sacred to him than the game, whether he wins or loses that. It's not the issue. Does it make sense? So when you hold a bigger value than the lower value you still pursue to the extent you need to, but the more pervasive value is what holds you. So as you refine yourself from the physical, the material, the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, the spiritual value covers all of them. So you go in accordance, you play your life in accordance to that spiritual thought. But if you don't evolve yourself, you may be playing just in accordance to the physical. You'll only do, everything's focused on the physical. There is no bigger emotional or intellectual value or spiritual value. That is it for many people. That's what I'm saying. So the more you evolve, the more you refine yourself, the more you step up your capacity, you refine your emotions, you refine your thoughts, they become more pervasive, you're pitched up on something spiritual. Everything that you're doing is in a mode of just to get to the self, rightly or wrongly. Your attempt is that, to get to being full. You understood that the world won't satiate you, so you're going within. You may still have desires to pursue, but you understand you're not dependent on it. You're just pursuing the desire in itself to get out of it. But yeah, you had something. Sorry.
Just to give context on Djokovic, if he had attended the Australian Open, he would have exceeded Rafael Nadal's number of titles. He would have got the 24th Grand Slam title. So that was a turning point in his career. But notwithstanding his conviction, he's an environmentalist and he doesn't believe in the COVID vaccine. And as a life, he pursues an environmental life, environmental friendly life. So it was that conviction. So notwithstanding what was at stake and what was it that he was going to lose, he continued with his conviction of environmental friendliness and forsake his participation in Australia. Although the example is at a terrestrial level, his conviction was much, much stronger to forsake a Grand Slam title that would have then put him right at the top of the table of tennis player. That's what was the incident. So I just thought I'd share that.
Okay. So it's not, we're not arguing whether it's right or wrong or on what basis. It's just that he had a bigger picture in mind for himself rather than the picture of the game. That makes sense. I don't know, Tim, is there anything you want to add?
Simply that if I study Vedanta, I'll become better at tennis, yes?
Possibly. Certainly. Let's go, let's read the next.
A mind cluttered with these ignorance-born desires seeks fulfillment in the external world. Desires of different natures emerge from a person endlessly. They assume different forms. He aspires for success, wealth, knowledge, and a host of other limited goals in the world. The search for fulfillment never ceases. He constantly runs in all directions, trying to seek fulfillment of his desires. Consequently, he remains ever agitated. An agitated mind cannot concentrate, much less meditate and realize a supreme self. To circumvent this impediment, the great sages of the past devised an ingenious plan. By this plan, they divinized man's desires, which remained preoccupied with the world. They personified the objects of desires as gods and goddesses, success as Lord Ganesha, wealth as Goddess Lakshmi, knowledge as Goddess Saraswati, and several others. They superimposed divinity upon material pursuits, thus rendering the mind introvert to seek the self within. The reference to gods, devtas, in this verse, therefore, points to mundane goals. You can achieve these goals by adopting proper rites to reach them. The rites thus become different ways and means to achieve these ends.
So essentially, inevitably, slowly, divinizing everything, one gets there. That's the idea. One gets to the self because everything becomes divine. 21.
Yo yo yam yam tanum bhaktaha shraddhayar chittumicchati tasya chalam shraddham tameva vidadhamyaham.
Ash, if you could read the verse.
Whatever form a devotee seeks to worship with Shraddha, faith, I make that Shraddha of his unswerving.
Mm-hmm. So, any devotee that worships with Shraddha, a consistency of purpose, a drive to go beyond the mundane, in fact, right to the very end. I'll make that Shraddha unswervingly sane. So, meaning, if you pursue any of your activities with that Shraddha, you get there. Because the fact is that it doesn't make a difference whether one knows it or not. As we were talking, we don't know what it is. It's actually putting forward, we are that self, whether we know it or not. So this material person pursuing the world won't rest content. They always want something more, whoever you are. You want something more. Why do you want something more? To get that peace. So you gain your achievement of whatever you pursue, but you want something more next, to gain the next piece. So your mind won't rest content till you get there. So whatever your field of activity is, you want to enjoy more and more and more and more peace. Pleasure, peace, happiness. And there's no end to it. So the only time one is going to get that peace satiated is when one hits the self. So he's saying here, make that, whoever worships with Shraddha, consistency of purpose, makes that Shraddha unswerving. It solidifies your momentum, your drive to get to that self, because you're putting in the efforts. It's like you're putting in, the efforts become like a drive to get to the ultimate. And you do it yourself when you've got that Shraddha. And inevitably, if you keep going, you get there. So saying, whoever has that Shraddha, that thought on the higher, the consistency of purpose, inevitably going to get there. Can't fail. Because it's not going in a direction where it's endless. It's going in a direction where there is, you get to that infinite. But at the moment, we're focused on the vestures of the body, mind, and intellect, which are finite. They're transient. We die. Our mind and intellect, our thoughts are transient. Our emotions are changeable. So pursuing it in that direction is endless. But once you pitch up on the self in whatever you pursue, he says he'll make that Shraddha unswerving. So though we don't know what it is, it's like the quote of Rabindranath Tagore we've quoted before. It says, faith is a bird that feels the light and sings while the dawn is still dark. So how does the bird know to sing? How does it know it's going to get light? There's a faith that it is going to get light. And it sings. So that Shraddha, just keep going, it transforms itself, gains you a momentum until you get to that paripurnam. That's the idea. So he's saying, I'll make it unswerving. The self makes it unswerving. So anything you pursue, whether you're going in the direction of the world or the direction of the self, it builds a momentum if you keep putting in that consistency of purpose. So it becomes unswerving. You choose the direction. So if you're choosing the direction of something which is more universal, it becomes that. Let's read it.
Ashes had to go.
Ashes had to go. Tim, if you could read.
The human mind becomes attached to anything it contacts. A Bhakta, devotee's mind, develops an attachment to his God. Whatever form of God a Bhakta seeks with faith and devotion, Krishna supports his devotion to that particular form. Krishna encourages any form of devotion until the devotee's faith to his God becomes unswerving. This interpretation of the verse holds good for those who approach it from a devotional angle. The verse, however, lends a deeper significance to satisfy intellectuals as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, continue.
Verses 16 to 19 stated how a seeker's approach to God ranges from physical, mental, or intellectual objectives to the ultimate spiritual goal of self-realization. Whatever be the pursuits, material or spiritual, Krishna declares that he makes them unswerving and steadfast. It means that those who faithfully cling to God for gaining material wealth will continue perennially in their material pursuits. So will the emotional and intellectual seekers ceaselessly pursue their particular interests. Likewise, the seeker of truth will continue pursuing his spiritual path until he gains enlightenment. This happens because your original self, your real being, remains ever supreme, infinite. You being of infinite stature, your pursuits can never find fulfillment until they take you to the ultimate state of self-realization. Krishna, identifying with the self within, declares that he maintains your faith and consistency of purpose, whatever your pursuit be, secular or sacred.
So, whatever you want to pursue, a finite goal or an infinite goal, that activity is maintained. You keep going endlessly on a mundane or a material goal. It keeps perpetuating itself. But when you look or delve within, you'll keep going on that spiritual goal until you hit self. Because the vision is that you begin to identify on all the things which are of a spiritual nature. So it builds on itself till the whole thing becomes infinite. You keep building on that. So you see a different perspective. You don't see things in terms of the material. You understand it. It's not that you're foolish, you don't understand what's going on, but you don't have that attachment to that. You see its purpose for what it is and you go with it, but you're not attached to it. Your focus is on purely just getting to the self till you get there. So that's what you're identifying. As you think, so you become. So it makes it unswerving. Sometimes I've heard, what is it? For if you do anything for 21 days, it becomes a habit. They say that sometimes. I don't know where it's been said, but I've heard it. I don't even remember where I heard it. Well, I think what is it saying? What is it saying actually when we say that? If you do something for 21 days, it becomes a habit. What do we mean by that?
It's muscle memory, isn't it? It's what you're training your body to do repetitively. So therefore, you do it automatically. It's like every time you leave the house, you know you're going to turn the light off and lock the door and leave. So it comes automatically, second to none. So it's just repetition to make it a habit.
So to make it a habit. So I think could we do thinking on the self for 21 days and become it? Doesn't work like that, does it? It's a little bit more, it's something bigger, but yet you can train yourself in a manner to give yourself that reflection and awareness. I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not the intellect, I'm that self. There's things that you can do, the study of the knowledge, the reflection, then your practice, as you refine yourself, it's not 21 days, it's maybe 21 janmas, perhaps, or maybe one. But it's that thought process, that continuity, that shraddha you keep, a consistency of purpose that solidifies that thinking of something universal, where you begin to understand that the ephemeral things are not any value anymore. So maybe you start with something which gives a consistency of purpose in some aspect of your study and thinking, and then you stretch it a little bit more in terms of your activities, let it transpire into your actions. And slowly, slowly, you gather the momentum to becoming what you're actually after. Bits and pieces start to change in your personality. You become aware that you ought to do it this way or not that way for yourself. You know, there's no imposition there. This is a better way. This is a more universal way. This is a more peaceful way. This is a more enjoyable way. So you're not hitched on the kicks of acquisition and enjoyment, the instant. And maybe desire's what you've got to pursue, but you're not hooked on that. At the back of your mind, there's a different backdrop playing of something bigger to get to the self. So I don't think 21 days is going to do it, but we sometimes say this 21, you know, what are we saying? Have a consistency of purpose. Then there's the possibility of shifting your focus from the mundane onto the spiritual to maintain it on a spiritual bigger value whilst you're in the world, pursuing your perceptions, emotions, and thoughts. Let's read this. Mm-hmm. Tim.
I think I finished the reading the commentary of 21. We now move to 22.
22. Okay.
Sataya shraddaya yuktaha tasyadradhanam nihate labate satatha kaman mayyava vihitan hitan.
Sam, if you could just read the verse. We have a couple of minutes.
Endowed with that Shraddha faith, he seeks the worship of that form, and from it he fulfills his desires, these being verily ordained by me alone.
So, endowed with Shraddha. He pursues whatever it is, whatever your desires are, you pursue it. The desires get fulfilled. But that Shraddha you keep is the pursuit of your desire, is whatever you're doing is with the backdrop of getting to the self. You keep that Shraddha. Let's before we go any further, let's continue next week on this. Okay, Hari Om.
Thank you, Hari Om.
Thank you.
Hari Om.
Thank you, Padre.